Well, welcome everybody to today's 1 hour meeting. We are going to be doing this in 3 parts. And the first part is going to be here in this room. And we're going to hear a little bit about some of the experiences from COP directly, and then we're going to beam out from here to the Climate Action Studio, which I'll tell you about in a little bit, which is sitting in School of Agriculture, the Walker Institute, and then we're going to throw the ball even further and head to Baku in Azerbaijan, where we have our delegation on the ground at this very moment, who are going to fill you in live from there. Fingers crossed this all works and segues smoothly, as good as the BBC. So we're going to give that a go. So a little bit of a sort of introduction to start with. COP, is everybody familiar with COP and what it is and what it does? Great. So everybody knows that this is the big global summit that is convened once a year. It's called the Conference of the Parties. The parties are the countries who have signed up to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. There might be a few acronyms that get banded around today, so just shoot up your hand if we say anything or use any colloquial phrases like an informal informals or huddles that happen at COP. Just throw up your hand and ask. So 198 parties have signed up to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, meet once a year to coordinate global action on climate change, and in particular responding to the 4 tenets of the Paris Agreement, which aims predominantly to keep and stabilize global temperatures below 1.5 degrees C, or at 1.5 degrees C, by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But there are 3 other tenets of that Paris Agreement, which was agreed in 2015, and that surround supporting the most vulnerable communities to adapt and to be able to be resilient to climate change. And in the process, there is therefore the need for richer countries, developed countries, to be able to provide the financing to support those communities to adapt. So the COP focuses, has work programs within the Paris Agreement that are responding to those different pillars. This year's COP was very much focused on climate finance, and I will leave everyone to talk to you about that, because it's been very much a lively and frustrating topic over the last few days at COP. Just by way of quick background, the Walker Institute, as well as the parties to the convention, we have observers who attend the COP. Observers, as the name suggests, are there to observe the negotiations and intervene where they can through different constituencies that we belong to. We are part of the RINGO, which is a Research Institute's non-governmental organisations constituency. And every morning there are meetings, RINGO meetings, where we hear about specific actions that are happening on COP that day, where we can intervene and can take part and observe. So those constituencies play, and observers play, an important role. We have been going to the COP on behalf of the University of Reading with a delegation that comes across the university for about 12, 13 years now. Including being present at the COP29, which was the signing of the Paris Agreement, which was amazing given the current situation then when bombs were flying around in Paris. So it was amazing that the Paris Agreement happened. It was very important, and that's, and so we've been observers, and as well as that, the Walker Institute established in 2016 the Climate Action Studio. And that was because not only do we focus on risk and adaptation research at the Walker Institute, but we're very much involved in supporting the next generation to be literate between science and policy, and to be able to channel and harness what we do with our science as effectively as possible. And at Reading University, one of the statistics we like to fly is the fact that we do have the most IPCC authors in the world sitting at the University of Reading, and a manifestation of that impact is actually of the IPCC author work is actually being present and supporting the evidence that goes into informing negotiations at COP. The work that we've been doing in terms of supporting the next generation, the Walker Academy, we've been running this COP Climate Action Studio, and in 2016, the UNFCCC recognised this quite unique training work that we do by forming a partnership with us. There were only 18 that year. There were only 18 formal partners that the UNFCCC had, and we were one of those because of the recognition of the important work that the COP Climate Action Studio does. And we've continued that every year since, and it's a hugely important part of the COP work, and something that's also incredibly enjoyable and challenges us every year as well. So it's with great pleasure that I'm going to really hand this over to the COP Climate Action Studio teams in different places, as well as our delegation in Baku. I will just say very briefly that because I don't expect to have any word in after this, to say that at this year's COP, as well as discussions on climate finance, one of the important work programs is on the Global Goal on Adaptation, which was established at the COP in Glasgow. And there is a lot of effort now to implement adaptation, and in particular to understand what metrics we should use to be able to measure the effectiveness of adaptation. And so our work, Walker's work actually at COP this year, was to really push forwards what those metrics might be. And as a result, we will in discussion with UNEP, who lead adaptation, we will be providing a briefing because they are excited by what we're putting forward as a potential adaptation metric. So that was one very important piece of work that happened this year. And then we hosted, as we normally try and do, official side events and official events with the UN Environment Programme. And again, those were focusing on the implementation of a new declaration that happened last year at COP, which was a declaration on climate recovery, relief and peace. And it was the first time that a formal connection was made between climate and climate security. And a lot of the work we do in Walker focuses in the Middle East, as well as the Hindu Kush Himalayas, and in Africa, where you have a complicated relationship between climate, environment and conflict. And we are working very much on the ground on transboundary risk, hazards that affect multiple countries at once, and cooperation is vital. So our work actually directly at COP this year was focusing on transboundary risk and transboundary cooperation to help implement the COP28 declaration on climate recovery, relief and peace. And that is enough from me. So we just to show that the science that we do here has a really important role on the world stage. And we're there at COP making sure that we're putting that science through effectively. And the second part of that work is to enthuse and inspire these brilliant people to be lit and enjoy and know that they can also work between science and policy and be very effective in doing that. So on that note, I'm going to kick off with Lynn and Theo, and I'm going to, it was with great pleasure that Lynn and Theo were out with me in the very first week of COP. So I will just kick off and ask them a couple of questions. And I know that when you were successful in a competition which enabled you to go to COP, as did Thea and Juan, who we'll speak to as well. And within that, you set objectives. Why it is you wanted to go to COP. So I'd like you to, perhaps we start with Lynn. What were those goals you set for yourself, and did you manage to achieve them?
I think for me, firstly, welcome everyone. For me, the goal was to see if, so I had some experience in policy through my internship. So I do a PhD at the School of Biological Sciences. So I'm a biologist by trade, and that's not always inherently involved in policy. It should be, but that's quite a step sometimes. And I gained experience in policy through my internship, and I wanted to see if that was on a national level, so very UK based, and I wanted to see if I could follow what these types of conversations would be when you amplify the scale even bigger to such a world scale. So now not only is it stakeholders within a country, we're talking about stakeholders around the world, and I wanted to see if I could follow and kind of see how power dynamics work and how you can, strategically maybe make an influence there. And I think my perspective definitely broadened, and I think as well, I definitely could see those power dynamics quite clearly. It was funny how it does seem the same type of, stakeholders have certain interests, and that on a global scale translates really well. Countries will have certain interests that they will be vouching for, which I found really interesting in some of the roundtable discussions and negotiations that really shine.
So it's certainly illuminated for you, and it broadened your perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
So Theo, what about you as well? You set some pretty clear objectives, if I remember rightly.
I did. I did. I was mostly really interested in understanding how the negotiations worked, and I at the time of writing the application, I have to say I didn't understand as much about COP as obviously I do now. So I think on what you were saying about literacy, that really does resonate, because I probably would not write the same application now as I would have a few months ago. But if I recall, I really wanted to understand how it works, how all of the organizations and parties present there sort of come together, and just what the process is of decision making. And in particular, it's the Finance COP. I was very interested in understanding how climate finance would work, what that actually meant. I wasn't, I had vague ideas, I'd read news articles, but I didn't actually know what that would mean. So I spent COP really closely following what are called the NCQG negotiations, which is the new collective quantified goal, which is some transfer of money from the developed countries to the developing countries. And what that meant is I sat in a lot of negotiations as the official sort of Ringo observer. So each of the, I think, 9 constituencies sends in one observer, and their job, or our job in the Ringo constituency, is to take as many notes about what's going on and what's happening to then go out to people who can't be in that negotiation. And those are then published on the Ringo website. So that for me was a great way of making contacts and sort of friends in other scientists, because people like to know what's going on in our profession, and also a really good way to understand what people were actually asking for and where the different positions were and how people were reaching consensus or not, as the case may be, and what the sort of key processes involved were. I found it just hugely illuminating. There was one moment in a negotiation where, after what's called an informal, or inf, if you're even more sort of in the sort of dreamlike state of COP, which had lasted most of the night, the UK delegation turned up with a notification and read out 6 WhatsApp messages, and that was the whole hour-long scheduled meeting. And they'd sort of reached consensus on 2 or 3 points of a list of 30. And I found it very illuminating on sort of how the world works, and how these were sort of technical climate negotiators who were negotiating from their country's perspective to make sure that what their country wanted was on the table for what's happening this week, which is the ministerial sort of negotiations and decision making. And it was really interesting to see how that process unfolded. I think if I wrote an application now, it'd be much more about, now I understand that, it would be about how the observer organizations then influence that process, which is something I still have lots of questions about.
Hold that thought for next week. And I was really thrilled to see that delving into climate finance as you did, even into the nitty-gritties of taxation. You were interviewed by Matt Fry, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, on Saturday. So Matt Fry is Channel 4 presenter, but this was on LBC, and it was a very wide-ranging interview. I was asked a lot about sort of Elon Musk and Donald Trump and all sorts of things that I don't know quite enough about, to be honest. But yes, yeah, I did that, and I really enjoyed that as well. So that was something that I learned about myself. You can probably tell I don't mind a chat. So
yeah, I mean, it was incredibly well done. It was very wide ranging, and I thought that you dealt with Matt Fry in a better way than some politicians. So yeah, so you had as well as COP experience, media experience, and I think the same was with you, Lynn. Is that right? You had a
so I did
time with the media.
Yeah, so obviously COP is a big platform, lots of interest, especially from the media. So we got called in a few times to do, radio and TV interviews, and I think I ended up doing one on the ground in Baku at 9 p.m. after an entire day. So I think that was a challenge to start off with, but it was for the BBC Radio Berks in Oxford at 5 p.m. so prime time, and it was good. It's much easier when you're in it because you're talking about things that you're living basically in this COP bubble. But it did teach me a little bit how to kind of navigate really hard questions as well, especially political questions. Big topic was the US elections and how that potentially could interfere with negotiations. And yeah, there's a certain way of talking, which I learned quite helpfully.
Yeah, I mean, we were blessed with a workshop ahead as well with the media team from Reading, giving us all some pointers, which is good. So, Lynn, just how do you feel now? You've been to COP. We're still in the final hours now, and just reading the plenaries from the presidency this morning. There's a lot of work to be covered. How pessimistic or optimistic do you feel at this stage? We're almost at the 5 o'clock in Baku right now. We've got a day to go.
I find it a quite hard question because I feel quite conflicted. I think being in the room and seeing how many people are trying to, strive for their own goals made me realize how big of a challenge things are, especially in terms of finances. You've got so many different perspectives and everyone's trying to argue their point or how it should be. And I really did realize how big of a challenge it is, especially when you look at things like small island states that are affected quite heavily but may not have the finances to deal with adapting, and especially when you do have these funds that are especially set up for this, access to these funds was a big highlighted problem, and that makes you feel. I felt quite pessimistic in that aspect where we're arguing for an agreement, but then how does that actually get implemented, and how do the people who need the finance actually get it? That said, I do think there are some silver linings in a really strange way. I think where more countries are dealing with the effects of climate change, it's becoming very apparent that we are needing to adapt instead of just kicking the can even further. It's kind of, now. I think in one of the roundtables, the minister of Bangladesh said that climate change it's happening now. It's just not distributed yet. And I think the more that other countries kind of have to deal with their own situations, they kind of realize the importance. That's, I think, as well, the influence of private sector is quite, that's an optimistic thing I see, because even if the governments are maybe not, completely on board on adaptation plans, you can have subnational action that can be quite influential. And I think we saw a lot in the US that some states can do quite a lot of work despite the federal government maybe not being on board. So I thought that was a positive. So overall, very up and down. I'm not 100% sure, both pessimistic and optimistic, I guess.
That's a fair comment, I think. I perhaps will throw that over to Theo as well.
Yeah, I think I'll give a slightly more granular answer because my COP was very granular in what I ended up looking at. I've been watching a lot of COP TV over the last week since I got back, so I'm slightly addicted, I guess. And the latest draft of the new collective quantified goal was published this morning, and it is pretty similar to the one that was presented to the parties from the chairs at the beginning of week one. And I think, what I'm thinking about a lot is what's going to come out of COP, hopefully this time tomorrow, potentially more realistically, sometime early Saturday morning, if it comes out at all. And I've been thinking a lot about where parties are coming from. So, one thing is this is a transfer of wealth from developed to developing countries. So a first order naive view is a developing country will say yes to any amount of money, but that's not actually quite true, because a lot of, as a negotiating bloc, they might be wanting to hold out for more. They might want to sort of use the power of sort of this forum and public scrutiny and shame to try and get a bigger amount in a future COP. And there are lots of attached criteria. So, for example, to decarbonize power generation, most of the economy, they're talking about approximately 300 billion a year. And then to deal with the costs of the impact of climate change on developing countries, you're talking about, conservatively 400 billion a year. And then there's more, depending on which ways you slice it. So the developing countries have been asking for about 1.3 trillion. The developed countries started by saying we want to increase funding from a floor of 100 billion, but we're not going to give a number. And we're probably thinking somewhere in that ballpark. We're not thinking of 10 times that. So I think sorry, this is a very long answer, but hopefully you find it as interesting as I do. I think the optimist in me says there's a way through this by the end of tomorrow. There is political will to solve this problem, and the developed countries really do care about the impacts of climate change. So another number that I'll throw out is 800 to 900 billion is the cost of climate-related loss and damage to developed countries, not developing countries, only developed countries. So they do have a financial incentive, and there is a sort of selfish case for climate finance, as well as a sort of more international investment case as well. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm not going to be a pundit and say it's going to go one way or the other, but I definitely would say that I'm now, plugged
in it. Yeah, I think forwards is forwards, no matter the size of the step. Sometimes it's important to remember. So, and actually, just coming back to your point, no matter what happens in these global negotiations, what also creates positivity is how much you see happening, how much we're all involved in at a national level or a subnational level, knowing that there is climate action taking place. We are working hard as we can to make sure that we are using evidence that we can generate from science and making sure we're putting that through into policy as best we can, as quickly as we can. So yes, on outside and even within this, the global coordinated action, there is all this pocket of great stuff going on. So let me hand over now. Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to ask if we could just close down the wonderful photographs, remind me of everything we did. And can we go over to the Climate Action Studio now, please, in agriculture? With any luck. We have IT here to help facilitate this. So this is within the Walker Institute. We have a studio in there which gets set up and for 2 full weeks for COP.
Yeah, we're listening. We're online.
Thank you, Constance. We can't see you, but there we go. No, that's a presentation still. So just by one more part of explanation as well, the Climate Action Studio runs such that we have 2 students on the ground every single week of COP, and a remote studio working out of the Walker Institute throughout those 2 weeks on a rota basis, with a group of students coming in every day and linking up with the team on the ground. The team on the ground help to coordinate interviews with different people across the COP, but also to go to specific events on themes that the studio here at Reading would like to participate in. So welcome, we have Lucia, Alexandra, Emmy, Emily, and Emmy, Emma, and Ezra today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry to interrupt your day of COP live, but we'd love to hear a little bit from you. And in particular, we've heard a little bit from Theo and Lynn, but tell me a little bit about your own COPCAS experience and whether there's anything about COP that you hadn't expected. We've heard a little bit from Theo on that. Has there been anything what's been really surprising to you?
Okay, you can start.
Could go around this group.
Yeah, I'll start then. So what I found really exciting about COPCAS is that we've got this kind of laptop of all knowledge, basically, where we can access loads of events that are going on at COP Live. And it's really interesting to see all the negotiations and the side events and stuff like that. And I thought, why isn't this more accessible to the general public? You can get a couple of live streams of different pavilions, but it's really interesting actually seeing the negotiations. And because climate issues affect everyone or will affect everyone, it seems like it should be more accessible to everyone. And I guess, yeah, that's been what I was surprised about, that it's not hugely accessible. Yeah, someone else can go in.
Yeah, Ezra, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, on a similar, slightly positive, slightly negative note, I think it was really surprising for me. Obviously, we all come from a science background, but seeing how far removed the actual COP discussions are from either like national politics, local projects, and just the science in general. It's very high up there and almost theoretical, I think might be a good way to describe it, which coming from a very practical, solution-based or solution-orientated sort of field, it's a bit of a shock, but it's been really interesting to kind of see how that works. I mean, there's not a huge amount of connection between everything in COP, which is unfortunate, but you know, going forward in the future would be great to see more of that. And I think COPCAS has been just a little bit of a bridge for me at least, which has been quite helpful.
That's right.
Thank you.
I think maybe even on a little bit more positive note, and maybe like a broader like look at COP in general. As was mentioned, we have this laptop of all knowledge, and you kind of get like inundated with all the options. You can watch so much, and you kind of recognize that there's a lot of complexity in the conference. And there's like all these parties that maybe have differing perspectives and often like in conflict with each other. And so it's actually really, really surprising that we can get anywhere, that these discussions go anywhere, and that we can have 193 parties and we get something out of it. Although, I mean, a lot of negotiations have been Rule 16 this year, so maybe not so much. But yeah.
And yeah, I'm Lucia, and building on that, I think we do need to recognize that it's amazing that all these nations have come together to the table, and we're also here at the table together discussing and building upon this greater dialogue. And also coming to this as a biologist and PhD student studying biodiversity loss, I came into this with that background, really interested in learning how biodiversity intersects with climate change and climate finance. So it's been interesting looking for those links as well. And so even though we have not listened to much discussions on the science because the focus is climate finance, the science is there underpinning all this dialogue. And so it's been a really invaluable experience for us to understand how the science is translated and goes up that ladder to these higher negotiations in the greater context of climate and climate finance and international collaboration. So thank you for this opportunity. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lucia. And then just perhaps picking up on that, how does the research result in action question, which is one we've definitely thought about. And again, as Lucia mentioned, this particular COP has been called the Finance COP. And so the main thing that hopefully will be delivered by it is the NCQG that Theo was mentioning before, the new collective quantified goal. And there's been some other finance discussions as well around carbon markets, that when Theo was out in Baku, he was giving us lots of really useful information from the negotiations that he was attending. And so I think that's maybe in that sense, COP29 is unusual in that it's had this particular finance focus. And then, you know, when we're looking for the science, as you say, a lot of the science is feeding into that. It's the reason why that everybody agrees the money should, or we would agree the money should be given. We'll have to wait and see if the world governments agree on that. But we know that the science input, Professor, as you mentioned at the beginning, that underlies all of this is coming from the IPCC reports. That is the basis. That is the science that all parties have agreed on through that very complicated process, as you say, with many authors from the University of Reading. And so that is the basis of everything they're discussing. But a lot of the science discussions we've noticed are in the side meetings this time, and perhaps that's because of the finance focus for this one. If this finance at a good level is agreed, I think the COP will be seen as successful, and if it's not, then it won't be seen as successful. It's the thing they really, really need to do. Something else that's been obvious to us is that we do need to keep funding that research. We need to keep collecting more data, keep reporting on that, tracking on that, seeing what's happening to our planet, and making sure that all those policymakers are receiving that good, peer-reviewed, agreed information about what is really happening to our planet. So we do see the importance of that, and the importance of continuing to fund all of that research in all the different areas. My own project is looking at my PhD project is looking in South America at the changes in climate patterns over the last 2,000 years, and the ways that societies living in the Amazon rainforest have responded to those. And we hope to learn by doing that more ways of how we can help in the future, what we can learn from how the forest has behaved in the past. And again, you need to keep doing that research in order for us to be successful together. So so Professor Comforth, I think those are some of our reflections.
Thank you very much. You wrapped up a couple of questions in there that I was going to come to, but thank you very much. And I just on that point about the translation of the science into policy, our official event on transboundary risk, which is called Shared Risk, Shared Solutions, we were very lucky to have an MP from Nepal, who actually is the Minister of Finance for Nepal and was formerly the Chief Economic Advisor for UNDP. So it was wonderful to have his view, particularly around the financing when you're talking about cooperation on transboundary risk. But I was just speaking with him afterwards, and he said to me, we were talking about translation of science, very close to my heart, and he just said, it's about two things. It's about robust evidence, and then how do we implement it? That's all I need to know when it comes to whether I fund and how I fund and what we need to take forwards. Robust evidence and how do we implement it? Make it easy for us in those two areas. So I thought, right, yes, that's a very, very important sage advice. Actually, studio, I just would like to ask one more question. I'm afraid you're going to have to wing this, guys, but I really would like to understand. We talked about Ringo, which is a constituency. That's really important in terms of our role. But another one of the 9 constituencies we talked about is one of the other 9 constituencies is Yango, which is the youth constituency. We've also talked about power dynamics and roles of different groups. And I'd be very interested to have your thoughts on how effective the youth representation is at COP. Is it worth having a younger constituency? Is there any power in that voice, given that you are the next generation and are taking forwards climate, having to deal with impacts and climate change? How effective is that voice within all the other voices at COP?
Okay, so I'll take that. I think what we've seen is there are, especially in the last couple of days, there have been a lot of events which are building on the youth representations. A lot of speakers from across, especially developing nations, who are representing the views of their young generation constituency. And I would say that's a really good thing. Because those people obviously have, the younger that they are, the more they should be invested in what's happening to the future of the planet. That's the planet they're going to have to live in for the rest of their lives. Does anyone else want to make a comment on the youth side?
I actually had an interview this morning with Dr. Lauren Gibson at the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, which is in the US. I'm American also, you can tell from my accent. But it was really wonderful to talk to her because she directly engages with youth and is helping youth become more involved in ocean conservation and policy, not only in the US, but also globally. And I learned a lot from talking with her. And so evidence really supports that when young people are involved and are also leaders in these discussions about climate or biodiversity, everyone benefits all around. Adults, policymakers, national and international leaders. And so it is really important to bring in young voices, including women, indigenous people, and yes, and other young people from marginalized communities. So I think that is the way forward for climate action. Yeah.
Thank you for those comments. I couldn't agree with you more. There's nothing like even people who are disconnected from climate themselves. You all have friends and family who may be in that position, but when you suggest that they need to think about the legacy for children, for grandchildren, it changes people's perspectives very quickly. And I remember actually last year at COP, actually just before the event that we gave, which was called Later is Too Late. And we had a film at the beginning, and there was a young child speaking, and she said, I don't want to sort of be, too upfront, but I am going to be, because you guys are all going to be dead in like 30 years time. So could you just make sure you take action this year, because it's my future you're messing with? And it was like, okay, that's gone in. And that just left a lot of impact for people. There's that emotional connection when you start thinking about actually what does it mean for children? What does it mean for your grandchildren? So, and that unites across countries, across people of the world.
Could I add something to that
Yes,
as well?
Lynn.
I think I agree with you that the youth have a certain way of connecting to everyone. Yeah. And I think a way I saw that as well is I went to a session that was Indigenous leaders meeting, basically. And the focus there was on the youth. And one of the big issues that communities have had is lots of communities are based off of the spoken language, and they're not necessarily used to putting things on paper like we are in developed countries or in the West, let's say. And that they found that really difficult to translate their own knowledge in a way that, negotiators and ministers would understand. And they found that the youth actually, because of the internet and because of their own experiences, they tend to bridge that really well. And so they could take the knowledge that they've been given by their ancestors and by the people around them and their nature-based solutions and all sorts of, knowledge, and they could translate that in a way that was more accessible for people that weren't from that culture, if that made sense. And so that was a really big point where like we need to move forward, and Steve is a really good way of incorporating both tradition and moving forward.
It's a wonderful point. Thanks, Lynn, for sharing that. Great. So now we're going to try our one more live link up. And now we're going to run and go live to Baku. Baku sits on the Caspian Sea, which is just east of the Black Sea and east of Turkey, if you're trying to get your geographical bearings. And so we have Emmanuel, Professor Emmanuel Issa. Hi, Emmanuel. I'm just trying to work out from the back. Where are you?
I'm
I don't
sat
recognize that.
I'm sat on our usual spot on the ground.
Okay. Okay, great. So thanks for joining, Emmanuel, and I hope we have Thea and Juan there as well from Baku. Waving. Okay, great. Hi guys. Are you in COP at the moment?
Yes, I'm in the blue zone myself.
You're in the blue zone. Great.
Yes, and I'm in the green zone today.
Oh, wonderful. So we can actually have a nice tour of the COP facilities as well. So Emmanuel, let me throw out to you first. So you are surviving, you're into your second week at COP and acting head of delegation for this week. So I know what it can be like on a Thursday. What's the atmosphere like? And have you bumped into the African group of negotiators recently, and how are they feeling, for example?
The atmosphere is quite subdued, and Juan and I sat in a session which lasted over 3 hours today, trying to bring everything together. And I think no one was happy, no one was satisfied with anything that was going on. Almost every nation that spoke to the presidency we're not happy with the decisions that are being made, where we are, the fact that we are referring back to Paris Agreement instead of progressing from UAE agreement. The African groups in the pavilions, to say they're upset is an understatement. And I heard Theo drawing on the links that they don't just accept what is given. They have a say, they have a voice. And they realize that their voice is not being heard. And it's not just the African groups. The SIDS are also being challenged. And then the indigenous groups are also being challenged with what is going on. No one understands. So the atmosphere now, I'm just looking around because I'm sat on the floor looking at what is happening there.
On the
and
floor.
I'm sat on the floor. Yes, I can give you a clear picture of where I'm at.
Nobody sits on seats at COP.
No one. And it's challenging. No one sees an end to this. And I personally don't think it will be even resolved by Sunday. Most of the decisions have been shifted to Bonn. And then it will come to an end in Brazil, from what we hear.
Okay, they were beginning to say that on Friday when we were leaving, that the decisions, different work programs were being moved more and more into the Bonn. So halfway through the year, there is the meeting of the subsidiary bodies, basically the technical groups at the UNFCCC headquarters in Bonn, which is a sort of part of the progress towards each COP. So things are just the buck's being passed, everything's being kicked down the road a bit. Okay, I mean, so in terms of progress, has much changed despite the presidency plenary on Monday morning?
I think voices have been heard. People have been quite vocal. So if nothing at all, voices have been heard. Co-facilitators have written their statements and given it to the presidency. I think I was sat in the GST final.
That's the global stock take, right?
Yes, please. Sorry, global stock take. informal setting, and the co-facilitator said this: we've collected all your views. All we can do now is to give it to the presidency and they'll decide what they do with it. Now, that last bit was quite worrying because it shows that the powers are now back to the presidency. And if they don't take the views of the collective, then there's an issue there. And that's where all the parties are struggling to accept that their views will be heard.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Perhaps I can hand over to Juan, because you're also sitting in the blue zone at the moment. So the blue zone is the UNFCCC controlled zone in COP, where negotiations and the parties and observers are able to access and all the meetings happen. So Juan is in the blue zone as well. So Juan, you know, this is your first time on the ground in COP itself. How have you found this week? And is it different from your expectations? And how optimistic are you feeling as we head towards the end?
Yes, thank you, Rosalind. So I think COP has exceeded all my expectations. Before coming, like many of the other students, I wasn't super well versed in this science policy interface, and I still had so much to learn. But actually being here, I feel like I've absorbed so much knowledge in such a short space of time, whether it's queuing to go into a meeting room and hearing conversations, or even engaging in conversations with people there. And then going to the meeting rooms and seeing in person how these negotiations actually work, and what information is taken into account, etc. I feel like it has been incredibly valuable. So it has been really good in that sense, huge learning opportunity. And on whether I'm optimistic or not, I think I am naturally an optimistic person. So like Theo, I do hope and believe that this NCQG can be hopefully agreed, whether it's Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. What my worry is that the quantum or the amount of money they actually agree on is not going to be as high as the developing countries or LMDCs actually need it. So I'm hoping that there is a positive outcome from that. But I also just spent almost 3 hours in an overflow room watching the new event that they put on today, the Kurultai, which I think is just fancy word for a contact group where they go through each country and say, and that they're able to express their thoughts about the new texts that have been published overnight. And it has been a sort of disaster where every single country has been saying, we don't think this is enough. We really want to see the quantum number being agreed on, etc. So it's clearly there that there's a lot of work to be done, but hoping and remaining to be optimistic for now.
And you'll be there for a little longer, I imagine. I remember that it goes on to past 10 o'clock on these final few days. So stamina's required.
Yes.
Thea, you're in the green zone right now. Do you want to tell everybody what the green zone is?
Yeah, the green zone is a slightly different atmosphere, to be honest, to the blue zone. It's a place where anyone from the public, I think also can get tickets to. There's little pavilions all around this massive conference center, and also a stage where talks are going on throughout the day. I've spent the whole week up until now in the blue zone, so I feel like this feels quite different. There's not the high level energy that you necessarily feel in the blue zone and the fast pace. It's a little bit more laid back. It's more discussion based. The panels are a bit more informal, which is actually quite a nice atmosphere. And also there's a lot of children running around, I think from Baku, who are obviously learning and absorbing a lot and are able to attend all of these different lectures and talks going on, which feels like a really nice point of contact for the local area to really engage in what's actually going on in their city, because it basically takes over their city for 2 weeks. So it's nice for them to also be able to engage with it a little bit and understand what actually is happening behind these big, scary barricades that are all put up. So yeah, that's the green zone.
Thanks, Sue. Yes, the children will be given 2 weeks holiday from in Baku. schools through to universities and colleges for the entire 2 weeks, which we were surprised to find out when we were arrived in Baku. Thea, let me ask you a little bit another question, really. You find yourself in COP. Juan's just said it's been quite an intense journey of learning in just a few short days. What for you has been the added value of being in COP? And maybe you could also just say with your scenario or food biosystems, for example, as well.
Yes, I'm a scenario PhD student based in the meteorology department, and it's been an incredible learning experience, to be honest. I was at COPcast 2 years ago also, and I've followed COP throughout my life growing up. I've always, since I remember watching the Paris Agreement at school, and then following it every year pretty much through different media outlets. So I felt like I should know quite a lot. Being here, I realized I know not very much. And it's been a massive learning curve, but completely interesting. And you really do, like Theo was saying, you really do get into this bubble where all this terminology is suddenly being chucked around and you're just absorbing it all. I think also what is quite hard to really fully comprehend without being here is the scale and also the plethora of different things going on. So I was explaining it to someone the other day about how it basically feels like, to me, there's 3 different conferences going on all at once in the same venue. One which is really technical negotiations, which you can sit in on and really like absorb how the UN system works. The second is very informal pavilion type events, which are small and like you can get really up close to all the speakers and it's all very dynamic and there's loads going on in that room. Like it's quite overstimulating, but there's so much discussion, so much talk from really, really diverse backgrounds also, which is beautiful to see. And then on top of that, there's these side events which go on, which is a bit more formal and more about the negotiations and that link between the pavilion more dynamic and the negotiation more technical talk. And that is something like that massive that is going on is so hard to really fully understand and also experience without being here. From experience, like that's been my experience. And also because we're here, we're living it 24/7, and even if everyone staying in our hotel is also coming to COP every day, so you hear discussions even at breakfast. So yeah, it's a completely different experience by being here. Completely.
I completely understand all of that here. I'm just seeing the time. I'm just going to throw one more question back to you, Emmanuel, if I may, and similar to Thea, but what's the added value for Reading being at COP?
A lot, Ross. It's massive, and I think I echoed that in a COPcast which Robert attended. That even was it yesterday, 2 days ago, Tia and I were walking through the pavilions, and someone from International Organization Standards looked at us and said, "Wow, has Reading got a seat at COP? Wow, that's amazing." Now, if someone at the standards is seeing that having a university have these status at COP, then we have to be proud in having this. It's massive. It's informative. We have our students learning a lot from this. Had it not been Reading status, you wouldn't get Tia, you wouldn't get Lynn, you wouldn't get Theo, you wouldn't get Juan coming in. You wouldn't look at the last year's group. I sat in a group with University of Chicago students who couldn't get into the Blue Zone, 30 of them wanting to be part of COP. This is where promotions are. This is where education is. Yango is growing. You mentioned Yango. The youth are going to be there. And rightly so, 30 years from now, we will not be there. Reading has to continue to support this program, if for nothing else, to educate those who are coming so that if we are not there, COP will not be out of position, but rather something that the University of Reading is championing, and University of Reading has to champion it. Very few universities in UK have the opportunity to be at COP. We let go of our seats, someone will grab it as quickly, without even blinking. So it's something that, Ross, I think if I have to promote it every day wearing a COP badge or a COP uniform or a COP, or I've got a COP fleece, so I'll be wearing it every day. Wearing it every day, then I'll promote it. I'll just put my color shirt aside and just wear my COP fleece every day, just promoting COP. But we cannot let this opportunity go by. University of Reading has to remain key in this. Walker Institute has to continue to be supported in doing what they do, because we are promoting not just Ross, not just Emmanuel, not just the academics, but we are promoting the future leaders in Juan, Theo, Tia, Len, those who are in the COPCAS studio, Lucia, all those other colleagues, Ezra, all those other colleagues in the COPCAS studio. So to cut a long story short, we cannot let COP go out of the remit of Reading.
Thank you, Manuel. That was an unexpected question for you. So thank you for that great answer. And we have typically had 6 in the delegation for the last 10 years. This last year, the CCC revised their algorithms, the way they were going to delegate passes, and our passes were slashed to 1. 1 pass on the ground, as were many others. I was able to send in a letter to the UNFCCC and said, this is our action. This is what we've done every year over the last 12 years, whether it's official events, working for interventions on specific work programs, and running the Climate Action Studio, which we're official partners of. So they looked at that and they said, okay, yes, that's true. We'll double the size of your delegation. We had 2 batches, which was incredibly unusual across all the other observer organizations. So we managed to climb back to that point, which meant that we've been able to rotate with 8 people over on the ground day by day. And we've had a virtual delegation of 20 this year. Again, we were able to move from 10 and over with different messages to the UNFCCC, we doubled that as well to 20. But as Emmanuel said, we stay active, we stay engaged, and we are supporting deliberately the countries and you guys, because we need more people who are conversant with science and policy and able to step out of disciplinary comfort zones and work to find how it is we need to formulate our science to address the decisions that are being asked. As that UNDP economic advisor said, I just want that one piece of robust evidence and then know how to implement that. So he doesn't want all this stuff, he just wants this bit. We need to know how to deliver that. So it's been wonderful to have you all engaging and so enthusiastic. It gives me great joy every year to run COPCAS. It's really fantastic. Perhaps if there is any burning questions from anyone else here, we have 3 different spots. If there's any question you'd like to ask from people who are living it quite literally at the moment.
Yeah, I have a couple actually. So the first one, this might be kind of obvious, but who's the biggest power player or like the most powerful agent in the COP summit?
The biggest power player in the COP summit. Would anybody like to proffer a thought?
I'll start the ball rolling so someone can disagree with me, and then we'll have an answer. I don't think there's really a one biggest player. So countries negotiate in blocks. So the biggest block of countries would be the G77 and China, which is 78 countries, quick maths. So that would be the biggest negotiating bloc, but other than having China in the tent, they don't have particularly large economies, and also subdivided into other negotiating blocs. So there's the Arab group, the African group, the Latin American and Caribbean group, all within that. And so they might be pulling in different directions and maybe not have such a unified voice as a more tight negotiating group. China, you might think, would be a really influential power, but actually they don't really say much. They just kind of, they have their red lines. If those red lines are sort of respected, that's fine. And then, I mean, I don't know, maybe groups like the Environmental Integrity Group, which is kind of Canada and Switzerland and basically non-EU, UK, Norway, US, Western countries, seems to be one of the developed country groups that says the most emphatic things. And I would also say the African group also says very emphatic things, often in response to what the Environmental Integrity Group has said. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're more powerful, it just means they're more willing to go out on a limb. So I don't necessarily think that's how it works.
Juan, Thea, any thoughts in the first few days you've been there?
I would say one of the groups you missed was the Arab group, which is very vocal in at least all the negotiations I have sat in, which hasn't been many this week because a lot of them have been behind closed doors. But the ones I have been in, they have been the ones holding up quite a lot of the discussions and maybe being the most controversial. But yeah, I would, that's one that sticks out for me at least. And whenever they go to the mic, I'm like, oh, what's gonna happen?
I think, Emmanuel, you remember the huddles of the Just Transition working program, and I think that was often a curveball was thrown from the Arab group on that one.
It was, Ross, but it was led by G77 and China. So even though the Arab group were the key factors in it was within the G77 and China that were pulling all the strings. I think it depends on where the interest lies, and that's where the direction will be. The pulling powers will be with all these nations who have a stake in what is happening. So I agree with what all that has been said. There are no key players.
Thank you. I'm conscious that we've managed to race through to 2 o'clock already, and so, which is unfortunate. If you, the COP Climate Action Studio is running now, so if you have any questions or just want to join in and see what's happening this afternoon, you are more than welcome to head off to Walker Institute. Is that all right, Climate Action Studio out there? Ready for a few visitors? I think Parveen is about to join us actually at 2:30.
Yes,
is that correct? So, but if anyone else would like, I know you just said you had a host of questions, so they'd love to have them, wouldn't you guys?
Yes,
we would.
Yeah, feel free to reach out.
So if you want to go down to the Walker Institute now and just join the group chat. You're in, in agriculture, yeah, agriculture, 1L 30 something or other. I should probably know, but I can't remember. It's just a studio. Okay, guys, can I just say thank you very, very much for your enthusiasm, your participation, for joining us from Baku at 6 o'clock in the evening, from the Climate Action Studio in the middle of a jam-packed day, and tensions of the final negotiations, from you guys for arriving back safely and joining us today in person. That's wonderful. And to everybody here who has made the effort to come in your lunchtime, I really appreciate it. And it's great. And please, you know where we are. We're in agriculture. We get involved in COP every single year. Next year, we'll also be taking an active role in Bonn at the halfway point, because we think it's very important that the science is also feeding through directly into the technical groups and the work programs that we're involved in as well. So we'll be heading to Bonn this time as well. But otherwise, thank you. And thank you, Jackie, for hosting this Under the Green Festival. I really appreciate that. Thanks to the sustainability team. Yeah, wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You won't leave me.